The storm swallowed the city whole. Rain didn't fall, it attacked, turning the street outside Seoul Metropolitan Hospital into a churning river of neon and shadow. Nurse Ji-eun burst through the emergency entrance, her blue scrub still spotted with blood from the teenager they'd lost an hour ago, her auburn hair plastered to her face like she'd crawled out of the ocean rather than a 14-hour shift. 14 hours. 3 cardiac arrests, 1 successful, 2 that would haunt her for weeks. A stabbing victim who'd bled out before the ambulance even arrived. A child with a fever that broke just before it could take everything. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, they never did after shifts like this, and her vision blurred at the edges, exhaustion dragging at her bones like she was walking through concrete. She swiped at her phone screen with trembling fingers, raindrops exploding against the glass. The rideshare app showed a black sedan, license plate matching, waiting in the pickup zone 30 feet away. Through the downpour, she could barely make out the silhouette, sleek, dark, anonymous behind tinted windows that reflected nothing but the storm's fury back at her. Perfect. She just needed to close her eyes. Needed someone else to carry her home while her mind stopped replaying the teenager's final breath, the mother's scream, the flatline that came too soon. Ji-eun yanked her jacket overhead and ran, her sneakers hydroplaning through puddles, her bag banging against her hip. The car was immaculate, far nicer than the usual rides, all clean lines and luxury she was too exhausted to question. She wrenched the door open and collapsed inside, the sudden silence and warmth hitting her like a drug. Oh, thank God, she gasped, sinking into leather seats that smelled like sandalwood and rain and something darker she couldn't name. Heat enveloped her immediately, not just the car's climate control, but something else, something that made the hair on her neck stand up even through her exhaustion. Maple Dong, Building 7. The one with the... She didn't finish. Her eyes were already closing, her body making decisions her mind was too depleted to argue with. The interior was dim, expensive, wrong in ways she was too tired to catalog. Maybe he was one of those luxury drivers. Maybe she'd accidentally ordered the premium service. Maybe she was hallucinating from lack of sleep. She didn't care anymore. The car was already moving, pulling away from the hospital's brutal fluorescent glare into the city's rain-slicked darkness, and Ji-eun let herself fall into unconsciousness with the complete trust of someone who had nothing left to give. She never saw the man in the driver's seat exchange a glance with someone in the shadows of the back seat beside her. She never felt the moment her head listed sideways and came to rest against a shoulder that tensed beneath the weight, a shoulder belonging to someone whose face had never been photographed, whose name was never spoken above a whisper, whose very existence was an urban legend that kept the city's underworld in line through fear alone. The black tiger looked down at the sleeping nurse, blood still on her scrubs, rainwater still dripping from her hair, and made a decision that would unravel both their carefully constructed worlds. He didn't tell his driver to pull over. He didn't reach for the weapon concealed in his jacket. He simply sat there in the darkness, watching this stranger sleep against him with the kind of trust that didn't exist in his world, and wondered when he'd become the kind of man who couldn't kill an innocent woman just for being in the wrong car at the wrong time. The introduction, next 30 to 45 seconds. This is Nurse Ji-eun, 28 years old, trauma specialist, the kind of healer who pours herself out shift after shift until there's nothing left but the desperate hope that saving one more life will finally fill the emptiness inside her. She doesn't have time for relationships. Doesn't have time for danger. Barely has time to sleep. This is the Black Tiger, no given name that anyone speaks, no face that's ever been captured, no mercy that's ever been documented. He built an empire on precision and violence, on the principle that witnesses don't walk away, that trust is a liability, that the only safe position is complete control. Their paths should never have crossed. The healer and the killer. The light and the shadow. The woman who can't stop saving lives and the man whose power is built on taking them. But on one rain-drenched night in Seoul, exhaustion and fate conspired to throw them together in the back of a car that wasn't hers. And when Ji-eun finally wakes, 40 minutes later, in an unfamiliar neighborhood, with the city's most dangerous predator watching her with eyes that have seen too much, she'll have to make a choice that will change both their lives forever. Run from the monster. Or discover that sometimes monsters are just men who've forgotten they're still human. This is the story of the moment everything changed. The moment a tired nurse stumbled into a killer's car and lived to see sunrise. The moment the most feared man in Seoul's underworld discovered that the greatest danger isn't from your enemies. It's from letting someone see you're still capable of mercy. This follows the competitor's narrative flow structure while being completely original to your story, using the atmospheric opening, the exhaustion cataloging, the desperate entry, the sensory details of the car, the moment of relief that masks danger, and ending with the ominous revelation of whose car she's actually in. The kid couldn't have been more than 19. Ji-eun's hands were inside his chest cavity, literally holding his heart together while Dr. Kong barked orders she could barely hear over the roaring in her ears. The monitors screamed their flatline symphony, and she could feel the muscle going slack beneath her fingers, life draining away faster than they could pump it back in. "Come on," she whispered, her voice lost in the chaos of the trauma bay. "Come on, stay with me." But he didn't stay. Nobody asked his permission when the knife went in, and nobody could stop the inevitable when too much blood painted the streets before the ambulance arrived. Dr. Kong called it at 9:47 p.m., his voice flat and professional, already moving on because they had to move on, because there were 3 more patients waiting and grief was a luxury they couldn't afford. Ji-eun pulled her hands out slowly, the gloves peeling away with a sound that would echo in her nightmares. 14 hours. This was patient number 23. This was death number 2. And she was so goddamn tired of counting. She stripped off her trauma gown in the scrub room, catching her reflection in the steel surface of the supply cabinet. Her blue scrubs were spotted with blood that hadn't been hers, her auburn hair escaping its ponytail in every direction, her eyes hollow with the kind of exhaustion that sleep wouldn't fix. 28 years old and she looked 40. 28 years old and she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt anything but empty. The locker room was mercifully quiet. She changed her top, pulled on her jacket, grabbed her bag, and walked out before anyone could ask if she was okay. She wasn't okay. Hadn't been okay in months. But saying it out loud would mean admitting that maybe she wasn't cut out for this, and admitting defeat wasn't in her vocabulary. The storm hit her like a physical blow the moment she stepped outside. Rain didn't fall, it attacked, turning the world into a watercolor painting of neon and shadow, everything bleeding together until she could barely see 10 feet ahead. Her phone screen was a blurred mess in her shaking hands, but the ride-share app showed salvation, black sedan, license plate 33HA4892, arriving now. There. Through the downpour, a dark shape idling in the pickup zone, sleek and anonymous behind tinted windows. She ran without thinking, her sneakers flooding instantly, her bag banging against her hip, her lungs burning with the effort of existing. The door opened like a portal to another world. Warmth. Silence. Leather seats that smelled like sandalwood and something darker, something expensive. She threw herself inside and the door slammed shut, cutting off the storm's roar like someone had hit mute on the universe. Maple Dong, Building 7, she gasped, already sinking into the seat, her eyes already closing. The one with the... The sentence died. She was asleep before she could finish it, her body claiming what her mind couldn't give willingly. The exhaustion pulled her under like a riptide, and she went without fighting, her head listing sideways until it came to rest against something solid and warm. In the driver's seat, Juno's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, his hand moving slowly toward his concealed weapon. The question didn't need to be spoken aloud. "Boss?" The black tiger sat perfectly still in the shadows of the back seat, watching the stranger who just collapsed against his shoulder. She was small, delicate, her scrub still spotted with blood, her hair damp with rain. She smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion and something else, something clean in a world that had forgotten what clean meant. His hand rested on the weapon inside his jacket. One movement. One bullet. Problem solved. But he didn't move. He sat there in the darkness, feeling the slight weight of her head against him, the soft rhythm of her breathing, the complete and utter trust of someone who had no idea whose car she'd just stumbled into. It had been so long since anyone had touched him without fear or calculation that he'd forgotten what it felt like. "Drive," he said quietly. Juno's eyes widened fractionally in the mirror. "Boss? Just drive." So they drove. Through rain-slicked streets and neon-lit intersections, past neighborhoods that shifted from commercial to residential, from bright to dark. 40 minutes of silence broken only by her soft breathing and the whisper of rain against bulletproof glass. The black tiger didn't move. Didn't check his phone. Didn't take his eyes off the woman sleeping so peacefully against him. He should kill her. That was the rule. Witnesses didn't walk away. Mistakes didn't get second chances. But she wasn't a witness to anything except her own exhaustion, and the only mistake was hers. When her eyes finally opened, it happened slowly. A flutter of lashes. A soft confusion. Then awareness crashing in like a tsunami. She jerked upright, her gaze sweeping the unfamiliar street outside, then landing on him. The moment captured perfectly, her eyes wide with dawning horror, his face half-shadowed, watching her with the calm of a predator who'd already decided not to strike. "This isn't," her voice cracked. Who are you?" "You got in the wrong car," he said simply. His voice was quiet, controlled, carrying an edge that made her press back against the door. "Oh my God." Her hand fumbled for the door handle. "Oh my God, I thought," the app said. The app was wrong. He tilted his head slightly. "Or you were too tired to check properly. Please." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Please, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Please let me go." He studied her for a long moment, this woman who'd slept on his shoulder like he was nothing more than a taxi driver, this stranger who'd somehow survived the most dangerous 40 minutes of her life without even knowing it. "Where do you live?" She told him, her voice shaking. He gave Juno the address with a single nod. They drove in silence. She stayed pressed against her door, her eyes tracking every movement he made, her breath coming too fast. When they finally pulled up to her building, he leaned forward and opened her door from the inside. "Be more careful," he said quietly. "Next time, you might not be so lucky." She stumbled out into the rain, her bag clutched to her chest, and ran for her building without looking back. The black tiger watched until she disappeared inside, safe and whole and terrified. "Boss," Juno started. Not a word. They drove away into the storm, and the black tiger sat in the back seat where a stranger had slept against him, where her scent still lingered faintly in the air, and wondered when he'd become the kind of man who let witnesses walk away. Inside her apartment, Ji-eun locked every door, checked every window, and told herself it had to be a hallucination. Exhaustion playing tricks. A waking nightmare born from too many hours and too much death. But the sandalwood smell still clung to her jacket. And when she finally slept, she dreamed of eyes in the darkness, watching her with something that looked almost like curiosity. The first night, Ji-eun told herself it was shock. Trauma response. Her brain's way of processing 14 hours of hell by inventing something even worse. She sat on her bathroom floor until dawn, her phone clutched in shaking hands, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Black Tiger Soul brought up a restaurant chain and a martial arts dojo. Black Tiger Gang gave her nothing but old news articles about disbanded organizations from the 90s. She tried Black Sedan Kidnapping and got rideshare safety tips. She tried Dangerous Man's Soul Underworld and got a Wikipedia page about organized crime that read like ancient history. Nothing. No photos. No names. Just the faintest whisper in some forum post from 3 years ago, "You don't see the black tiger. You just hear about what happens after." And below it, deleted by moderators, "This thread has been removed for spreading unverified rumors." She closed her phone and stared at her reflection in the dark screen. Maybe she had hallucinated it. Maybe exhaustion had finally broken something in her brain. Maybe the man in the car had just been an off-duty driver in the wrong pickup zone, and her terror had painted him into something he wasn't. But she could still smell the sandalwood on her jacket. The second night, Min Seo noticed. They were in the break room, 12 hours into another shift, and Ji-eun was staring at her coffee like it held answers instead of just caffeine and regret. "You've been weird," Min Seo said, her voice carrying that particular blend of concern and nosiness that made her both Ji-eun's best friend and biggest liability. "Weirder than usual, I mean. You barely said 3 words during the appendectomy, and you love appendectomies." "I don't love appendectomies. You literally called them satisfyingly straightforward last week." Min Seo leaned closer, her eyes narrowing with the diagnostic precision she usually reserved for patients. "What happened? Bad date? Family drama? Did you finally realize you haven't had a day off in 6 months and you're having an existential crisis?" Ji-eun opened her mouth. Closed it. What could she say? "I got in the wrong car and maybe almost died, but maybe imagined the whole thing, and now I can't stop thinking about a man whose face I can barely remember but whose eyes I see every time I close mine." "Just tired," she said instead. "Really, really tired." Min Seo didn't look convinced, but trauma bay doors burst open with a motor vehicle accident, and the conversation died beneath the urgency of shattered bones and internal bleeding. Ji-eun threw herself into the work with the desperate focus of someone trying to forget, and for a few hours, it almost worked. But the nightmares came anyway. Not the usual ones, the patients she couldn't save, the blood she couldn't stop, the flatlines that echoed in her sleep. These were different. These were eyes in darkness, watching her with an intensity that made her skin burn. A voice like smoke, "Be more careful," the scent of sandalwood mixing with rain and danger, and something that felt almost like promise. She'd wake gasping, her heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that she'd escaped something far worse than getting lost in a stranger's car. Or maybe she hadn't escaped at all. Maybe she'd just been granted a stay of execution. The third night, she saw the car. She'd pulled a double shift, 20 hours, because someone called in sick and she couldn't say no when saying no meant people might die. She stumbled home at 2 a.m., her vision tunneling with exhaustion, and there it was. Black sedan. Tinted windows. Parked across from her building in a pool of shadow between streetlights, idling like a predator that had all the time in the world. Ji-eun's breath caught. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, her keys cutting into her palm, every nerve screaming at her to run. But the car didn't move. Didn't approach. Just sat there, watching, a silent reminder that maybe she hadn't imagined anything at all. She ran inside and didn't look back. The fourth night, it was waiting outside the hospital. Ji-eun spotted it the moment she pushed through the ER doors. Same car. Same shadows. Same terrible certainty settling in her chest that this was real, had always been real, would always be real. She turned to go back inside, to hide in the fluorescent safety of the hospital until sunrise, until forever if necessary. But a man was suddenly there, materializing from the darkness like smoke given form. Not him, someone else. Younger, compact, with the kind of posture that spoke of violence held carefully in check. The driver from that night, she realized. The one whose eyes had asked a silent question in the rearview mirror. "Nurse Ji-eun," he said, his voice perfectly polite, perfectly terrifying in its calmness. She took a step back. I can't. He wants to see you again." The words landed like a punch. Not a request. Not quite a threat. Something else entirely, something that made her skin prickle with warning, and something darker she didn't want to name. "Tell him no," she managed. "Tell him I made a mistake and I'm sorry and I just want to forget it happened." "He doesn't think you want to forget." The driver's expression didn't change. 3 nights you've looked for that car. He saw you. Saw you searching online. Saw you check over your shoulder every time you leave work. You're not afraid he'll come back. You're afraid he won't. That's not, but the denial died in her throat because maybe it was true. Maybe beneath the terror was something else, something that had woken up in that back seat and refused to go back to sleep. Curiosity. Fascination. The same reckless impulse that made her run toward emergencies instead of away from them. One ride, the driver said. He just wants to talk. You'll be safe. Safe, Ji-eun repeated, the word tasting like a lie. Nothing about this was safe. Nothing about him was safe. She knew that with the same certainty she knew how to find a pulse in the dark, how to stop bleeding with pressure and prayer. But she was walking toward the car anyway, her feet making decisions her brain couldn't justify, her hand reaching for the door handle like she was reaching for a knife's edge and didn't care about the bleeding. The driver opened the door for her this time. The interior was exactly as she remembered, leather and sandalwood and shadow. But this time, she wasn't alone in the back seat. The black tiger sat in the corner, exactly where she'd slept against him, watching her with eyes that held recognition and something else she couldn't read. He looked different than her nightmares had painted him, younger somehow, though no less dangerous. Beautiful in the way predators were beautiful, all sharp edges and controlled power. You came, he said simply. Ji-eun climbed inside because turning back now felt more impossible than facing forward. I'm here, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. What do you want? His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. To understand why you're not running. Maybe I'm too tired to run anymore. No. He leaned forward slightly, and she caught that scent again, sandalwood and rain and danger. You're curious. Just like me. The door closed. The car pulled away from the hospital's harsh lights into Seoul's glittering darkness. And Ji-eun sat across from the most dangerous man in the city and wondered when she'd become the kind of person who would step into fire just to see if she could survive the burning. The car moved through Seoul's nighttime arteries like a shark through dark water, smooth, purposeful, untouchable. Ji-eun sat with her back straight, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking, hyper-aware of every breath she took and the man watching her from the shadows. This time she could really see him. The first night had been rain and exhaustion and terror blurring everything into impressions. But now, with the city lights streaming through the windows, painting everything in neon and gold, she saw the sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell perfectly despite the humidity that turned hers into chaos, the expensive cut of his suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her salary. He was younger than she thought, early 30s maybe, though his eyes looked older. Beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, like admiring a blade's edge right before it cut. You're staring, he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. You brought me here to look at you, Ji-eun shot back, surprising herself with the sharpness. Fear did strange things to her mouth, made her brave when she should be silent. What else am I supposed to do? That almost smile again, the one that didn't quite reach his eyes. You're not what I expected. Yeah, well, you're exactly what I expected. Expensive suit, expensive car, expensive cologne that probably costs more than my monthly rent. She was talking too much, her nervous system flooding with adrenaline that had nowhere to go. So what happens now? You wanted to see me. Here I am. Are you going to explain why you've been stalking me, or do I just sit here and wonder when this becomes a crime scene? If I wanted to hurt you, you would never have woken up that first night. He said it matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. You interested me. That doesn't happen. What doesn't happen? Women getting in your car. People surprising me. He leaned forward slightly, and the light caught his face fully for the first time. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, faint but visible, the kind that spoke of violence survived. I've spent 15 years building a world where nothing surprises me. Where every variable is controlled, every outcome predicted. And then you fell asleep on my shoulder like I was nothing more than a taxi driver. Ji-eun's throat went dry. I was exhausted. You were trusting. The word sounded foreign in his mouth, like he'd learned it from a dictionary instead of experience. Do you know who I am? I know what people call you. The Black Tiger. She watched his expression, looking for confirmation, for denial, for anything. I know there's nothing about you online except whispers and deleted forum posts. I know your driver was ready to kill me that night, and you stopped him. I know you could have left me on the side of the road or worse, and instead you took me home and told me to be more careful. And that made you curious enough to get back in my car. No. She met his eyes directly, refusing to look away even though every instinct screamed at her to submit, to lower her gaze, to acknowledge the predator across from her. That made me confused. Curious would be wanting to understand why a man with your reputation would show mercy. Stupid would be acting on that curiosity. She gestured around the car's interior. So I guess I'm stupid. He laughed. Actually laughed, the sound low and genuine and completely unexpected. You're a nurse. Trauma specialist. You work 60, 70 hours a week at Seoul Metropolitan. You live alone in an apartment you can barely afford because you send half your paycheck back to your family in Daegu. You haven't taken a vacation in 2 years. You eat 1 meal a day if you're lucky. Last month you donated blood on your day off and then pulled a double shift. Tell me, Nurse Ji-eun, which one of us has a death wish? The fact that he knew all of this should terrify her. Instead, it made her angry. I save lives. And I take them. No shame in his voice. No apology. Just statement of fact. We exist on opposite ends of the same spectrum. You pour yourself out trying to keep people alive. I remove the ones who threaten what's mine. Both of us deal in blood and aftermath. Both of us lie awake wondering if we made the right choice. The only difference is you get to call yourself a hero. The difference, Ji-eun said quietly, is I couldn't live with myself if I stopped. Something flickered across his face, recognition maybe, or respect. Tell me about your work. What you did today. Why? Because I've never met anyone who runs toward disaster instead of away from it. Because in my world, everyone wants something from me, power, protection, permission to survive another day. But you didn't know who I was, and you still weren't afraid. He tilted his head slightly. You were just tired. And somehow that was more honest than anything I've experienced in years. So she told him. About the motorcycle accident that came in at noon, the teenager with internal bleeding they'd saved by literal seconds. About the grandmother with heart failure who kept apologizing for being a burden while they fought to keep her alive. About the overdose in Bay 3 and the stroke in Bay 7 and the endless parade of humanity breaking down in ways that turned her hands red and her soul raw. He listened like he was learning a foreign language, his expression intense, focused entirely on her in a way that made her skin burn. Nobody listened like this. Min Seo listened while checking her phone. Her mother listened while planning her next lecture about Ji-eun working too hard. But this man, this dangerous, violent man, listened like her words mattered, like understanding her meant something. Have dinner with me, he said when she finally fell silent. Ji-eun blinked. What? Tomorrow night. I have a private club. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere we can talk without, he gestured vaguely at the car, at the city streaming past, at the impossibility of their situation, all of this. That's insane. Yes. I don't even know your real name. Would it change anything if you did? She wanted to say yes. Wanted to say that names mattered, that knowing who he was beneath the legend would make this less dangerous, less reckless, less like stepping off a cliff into darkness. But it wouldn't. She knew that with the same certainty she knew how to find a heartbeat in the quiet. I have a shift tomorrow until 7, she heard herself say. 8 o'clock then. Juno will pick you up. The car slowed, and Ji-eun realized they were back at her apartment building. The entire ride had been a circle, going nowhere except through conversation that felt more intimate than touch. Juno opened her door from outside, professional and silent. She started to climb out, then paused. Why me? The black tiger met her gaze, and something in his expression shifted, not softer exactly, but more open. More honest. Because when you looked at me that first night, you didn't see the legend. You just saw a man in a car. And I forgot what that felt like. His hand came up, steadying her elbow as she stood, and the touch burned through her jacket like electricity. They both froze, her on the sidewalk, him still seated, his fingers wrapped around her arm in a gesture that was supposed to be polite but felt like so much more. The city noise faded. The rain had stopped without her noticing, and the air smelled clean and dangerous and full of promise. 8 o'clock, she whispered. I'll be waiting. She pulled away and walked toward her building without looking back, though she felt his eyes tracking every step. Inside her apartment, she leaned against the locked door, her heart racing, her mind spinning with all the reasons this was wrong and dangerous and impossible. But her hand still burned where he'd touched her. And she already knew she'd be ready at 8. Ji-eun had worn her only dress, a simple black thing she bought for her cousin's wedding 3 years ago and hadn't touched since. Standing in the entrance of the Black Tigers Club, she realized she might as well have shown up in her scrubs. The women gliding past wore labels she recognized from magazine covers, their jewelry catching light like small supernovas, their confidence worn as casually as their Chanel. She felt like a child playing dress-up, her department store heels already pinching, her hair refusing to cooperate despite 20 minutes of effort. The club itself was a study in controlled opulence. Dark wood and darker leather, low lighting that made everyone beautiful and secretive, the kind of place where deals were made in whispers and blood got cleaned up before it could stain the marble floors. A hostess had escorted her through the main room without asking her name, which meant they'd been expecting her, which meant he'd told them to expect her, which meant this was real and happening and she couldn't pretend anymore that this was just curiosity. He was waiting in a private room on the 3rd floor, standing by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city like he owned every light glittering below. He'd traded the car's shadows for tailored perfection, charcoal suit, black shirt open at the collar, the kind of casual elegance that came from never having to try. When he turned and saw her, something flickered across his face that might have been surprise or appreciation or hunger. You came, he said, as if there'd been any doubt after last night. I'm here, she replied, using the same words as before, establishing their pattern, their rhythm. Though I'm pretty sure I'm underdressed for whatever this is. You're perfect. He said it simply, without flattery, like stating a medical fact. Then his hand was on the small of her back, guiding her toward a table set for 2, and the heat of his palm through the thin fabric of her dress made her forget how to breathe properly. Dinner was a parade of dishes she couldn't name, wines that probably cost more than her monthly student loan payment, served by staff who appeared and vanished like ghosts. But Ji-eun barely tasted any of it. She was too aware of him across from her, the way he watched her with that focused intensity, the way his questions peeled back layers she usually kept protected. He wanted to know about medical school, about her family, about the moment she decided to spend her life running toward other people's emergencies. She found herself telling him about her father's heart attack when she was 16, how she'd frozen while her mother called the ambulance, how the paramedics' calm competence had seemed like magic. How she'd promised herself she'd never be helpless like that again. So you became a trauma nurse to save your father, he said. I became a trauma nurse because he died anyway. The words came out harder than she intended. And I couldn't stop thinking that if I'd known more, done more, been more, maybe I could have changed the outcome. You can't save everyone. That doesn't mean I stopped trying. Something in his expression shifted, became more guarded. And what about saving yourself? Before she could answer, the door opened without knocking. A man stepped in, expensive suit, expensive watch, expensive arrogance radiating from every pore. His eyes swept over Ji-eun with the kind of assessment that made her skin crawl, then landed on the black tiger with calculated disrespect. So the rumors are true, the man said in Korean, his tone deliberately loud, deliberately provocative. The black tiger keeps a pet nurse now. Tell me, does she patch you up after your little tantrums, or is she just for? He didn't finish the sentence. The black tiger moved with a speed that didn't seem human, crossing the space between them in a heartbeat. His hand caught the man's throat, driving him back against the wall with enough force to crack the decorative panel. The man's eyes went wide, his face reddening, his fingers clawing uselessly at the grip cutting off his air. Her name, the black tiger said softly, his voice carrying more menace than any shout, is Nurse Ji-eun. And if you ever speak of her, speak to her, or even think about her again, I will personally remove every bone in your body one at a time until you're nothing but a bag of meat begging for death. Do we understand each other, Choi Ssi? The man managed a strangled nod. The black tiger held him for 3 more seconds, long enough to make his point, short enough to avoid actual murder, then released him. Choi collapsed, gasping, and scrambled out of the room without looking back. Silence fell like a curtain. Ji-eun sat frozen in her chair, her heart hammering, her mind trying to process what she'd just witnessed. The violence had been swift, controlled, terrifying in its casualness. This was what he was. Not the man who listened to her talk about saving lives. Not the man who'd shown her unexpected mercy. This was the predator, the killer, the legend that made grown men whisper. He turned back to her, and she saw it in his eyes, the waiting, the expectation that she'd run now, that the illusion would shatter and she'd finally see him clearly. But his hand was already on her back again, warm and steady, anchoring her to the moment. He leaned close, his breath ghosting across her ear, and whispered, "You're safe with me." And the terrifying part was that she believed him. Not safe from him, she'd never be that. But safe with him, protected by him, shielded by the violence he wielded like a surgeon's scalpel. Precise. Purposeful. Devastating. "Tell me why you became this," she said quietly. He sat back down across from her, and for a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started talking, his voice low and steady, telling her about a childhood in Busan's worst neighborhoods, about a mother who died of an overdose when he was 12, about survival requiring choices that carved away everything soft until only the predator remained. "I was 15 when I killed for the first time," he said, watching her face for the flinch, the judgment, the fear. "A man who thought a kid was easy prey. I proved him wrong. And when his associates came for revenge, I proved them wrong too. By 17, people twice my age were taking orders from me. By 20, I'd built something that couldn't be torn down. I'm not proud of what I am. But I'm alive. And everyone who tried to destroy me isn't. You didn't have to become a monster to survive." "Yes," he said simply. "I did. In my world, mercy is weakness. Hesitation is death. The moment you show compassion, someone puts a knife in your back." He leaned forward. "Until you. You slept on my shoulder like I was safe. And I couldn't pull the trigger." The air between them felt charged, electric, impossible. Ji-eun stood, her legs unsteady, and walked to the window. Seoul glittered below, millions of lives intersecting and separating, and she wondered how many of them were having dinner with their own destruction. He came up behind her, close enough that she could feel his heat, smell the sandalwood that had haunted her dreams. "You should leave," he said quietly. "Walk away while you still can. This world will swallow you whole." She turned to face him, and they were so close now that breathing felt dangerous. "What if I don't want to leave?" "Then you're more reckless than I thought. Maybe I'm tired of playing it safe. Maybe I'm tired of only existing in emergency rooms and empty apartments. Maybe," the words caught in her throat because she didn't know how to finish that sentence, didn't know how to explain the pull she felt toward him, this beautiful terrible man who'd somehow become the most honest thing in her carefully controlled life. He kissed her. Or she kissed him. Later, she wouldn't be able to say who moved first, only that suddenly his mouth was on hers and the world was burning. It wasn't gentle. Wasn't sweet. It was teeth and hunger and the taste of expensive wine mixed with something darker. His hands were in her hair, on her waist, pulling her closer like he was trying to erase the space between them entirely. She kissed him back with all the desperation of someone who'd been drowning in just found air, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her body pressed against his like she could somehow crawl inside his skin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw it in his eyes, the realization that she'd become something he couldn't kill, couldn't control, couldn't walk away from. "I'm in too deep," she whispered. His thumb traced her bottom lip, his expression caught between triumph and something that looked almost like fear. "So am I." Ji-eun started drinking better coffee. That's what Min Seo noticed first, not the exhaustion that had become Ji-eun's default setting, not the way she checked her phone between patients, but the fact that her morning beverage suddenly came from the artisan place 3 blocks away instead of the hospital vending machine. "Since when do you spend $8 on coffee?" Min Seo asked, cornering her in the break room between a compound fracture and a possible stroke. "You literally told me last month that expensive coffee was for people who had their lives together." "Maybe I'm trying to get my life together." Ji-eun avoided her friend's eyes, busying herself with adding cream she didn't need. "Or maybe something's going on." Min Seo's voice dropped into that particular register that meant she wouldn't let this go. "You're different. You leave right at shift change instead of volunteering for overtime. You smile at your phone. You're wearing lip gloss, Ji-eun." "Lip gloss? To the ER. It's just." "Just what?" "A guy. Please tell me it's a guy and not some kind of medical crisis you're hiding." Min Seo grabbed her shoulders, forcing eye contact. "Because if you're sick and not telling me, I will personally murder you and then resuscitate you just so I can murder you again." "I'm not sick." Ji-eun pulled away, her chest tight with the weight of everything she couldn't say. How could she explain that she spent her nights in a world Min Seo couldn't even imagine? That she'd kissed a man whose name she still didn't know, whose hands had killed but held her like she was something precious. That she was living 2 completely separate existences and neither felt entirely real anymore. The trauma bay doors burst open before Min Seo could push harder. Gunshot wound, multiple casualties, all hands needed immediately. Ji-eun threw herself into the chaos with relief, letting the familiar rhythm of blood and urgency erase everything else. She didn't notice the man on the gurney in Bay 4 until she was already elbow-deep in his treatment, her hands working to stabilize his vitals while Dr. Kong shouted orders. The man's eyes opened briefly, unfocused with pain and shock. Then they sharpened, locked onto her face with sudden recognition. She knew that look, had seen it before in the club, among the men who surrounded the Black Tiger with lethal loyalty. This was one of his. "You," the man gasped in Korean. "You're quiet," she said sharply, checking his foreline with shaking hands. "Save your strength. You've lost a lot of blood." But the damage was done. 2 other men from the same shooting sat in adjacent bays, close enough to hear. Close enough to see her face. By the time Ji-eun's shift ended, her connection to the Black Tiger was no longer a secret contained to his inner circle. The first warning came that night. She found it slipped under her apartment door, a single photograph of her leaving the hospital, her face circled in red marker. No words. No demands. Just the implicit threat: "We know who you are, we know where you work, we can reach you whenever we want." Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped her phone calling him. He answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting, and maybe he had been. "I need you to listen carefully," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Pack a bag. Juno is already outside. You're not staying there tonight." "What?" "No. I have a shift in 6 hours. You're not going to that shift. You're not going back to your apartment. Someone sent you a message, which means they know about you, which means you're not safe anymore." She could hear movement on his end, rapid footsteps, doors opening and closing. "I'm handling it, but until I do, you need to disappear." I'm not disappearing. Anger flared hot and sharp, cutting through the fear. I have patients depending on me. I have a life that existed before you. And I'm trying to make sure you continue having a life. His voice rose for the first time since she'd known him, the control fracturing. Do you understand what that photograph means? It means rival gangs see you as leverage. It means they'll use you to get to me. It means they'll take you apart piece by piece just to watch me bleed. Then maybe, she stopped, the words catching in her throat. Maybe this was too much. Maybe they needed to end this before it destroyed them both. But she couldn't say it. Couldn't make herself give voice to the ending. Maybe what? His voice dropped back to that dangerous quiet. Say it, Ji-eun. Maybe we should stop seeing each other. Maybe you should go back to your safe, lonely existence. Maybe I should have killed you that first night after all. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Then Ji-eun heard herself say, very quietly, maybe I'm already too far gone to walk away. She heard him exhale, a sound caught between relief and resignation. Juno is outside. Please. The safe house was in Gangnam, buried in a luxury high-rise where anonymity cost as much as visibility elsewhere. Juno escorted her up without speaking, his presence both reassuring and terrifying because she knew what he was, had seen men like him in the ER with injuries that told stories their mouths never would. The black tiger was already there, pacing the length of the floor-to-ceiling windows like a caged predator. When she walked in, he crossed to her in 3 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that burned. You can't keep working at that hospital, he said. Yes, I can. They know where to find you. Then I'll be careful. But I'm not abandoning my patients because your enemies want to use me against you. She grabbed his wrists, holding him when he tried to pull away. This is who I am. If you want me, you get all of it, including the parts that complicate your life. Complicate, he laughed without humor. You don't complicate my life, Ji-eun. You've become my life. And that terrifies me more than anything I've faced in 15 years. So what do we do? He was quiet for a long moment, his forehead pressed against hers, his breath warm on her lips. Then he said, you keep working. But you don't go anywhere alone. There will be people watching, you won't see them, but they'll be there. Driver to and from work. Eyes in the hospital parking lot. Shadows that keep you safe. I'll feel like I'm being stalked. You are being stalked. By me. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her face up. I told you to be more careful that first night. I should have known you wouldn't listen. She kissed him then, pouring all her frustration and fear and impossible affection into it. When they finally broke apart, she saw something raw in his expression, something vulnerable he usually kept hidden. Show me, she said quietly. Show you what? The parts of you that made you into this. The scars you're hiding. She took his hand, leading him toward the couch. You've seen all of me, the exhaustion, the doubt, the broken pieces I glue back together every shift. Let me see you. He hesitated, then slowly unbuttoned his shirt. His torso was a map of violence, old knife wounds, bullet scars, the ghost of burns that had healed badly. She traced them with gentle fingers, her medical training cataloging injuries while her heart broke for the boy who'd survived them. This one, he said, touching a particularly brutal scar along his ribs, was from my first real fight. 15 years old, stupid enough to think I was invincible. The blade went between my ribs, collapsed my lung. I woke up 3 days later with a reputation and a death wish. And this? She touched a circular scar on his shoulder. Bullet. 21 years old. A rival thought he could end me. He was wrong. He caught her hand, pressed his lips to her palm. Every scar is a lesson. Every injury is a reminder that hesitation kills. I stopped being soft a long time ago, Ji-eun. There's not much left to save. That's not true. She pulled her medical kit from her bag, she'd grabbed it on instinct when packing, and began cleaning a fresh wound on his forearm he'd been hiding. You let me live. You let me in. You're fighting to keep me safe. That's not nothing. His free hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with heartbreaking gentleness. I'm falling in love with you. And that's the most dangerous thing I've ever done. Ji-eun's hands stilled. The admission hung between them like a confession, like a prophecy, like a promise and a threat all at once. She looked up from his wound to meet his eyes and saw the truth there, the terror, the certainty, the absolute vulnerability of a man who'd built walls too high to scale, finally letting someone inside. I know, she whispered. Me too. They brought the casualties to her at 3 a.m., bypassing the ER entirely, flooding into the safe house with blood trailing across marble floors that had probably never seen violence this close. Ji-eun jerked awake on the couch where she'd fallen asleep waiting for him, her nurse instincts kicking in before her brain fully processed what she was seeing. 5 men. 3 with gunshot wounds, 1 with a knife embedded in his abdomen, 1 barely conscious from what looked like blunt force trauma. The Black Tiger's inner circle, his most trusted soldiers, bleeding out on expensive furniture while Juno barked orders in Korean too rapid for her exhausted mind to fully translate. What happened, she demanded, already moving toward the worst case, the knife wound, always the knife wound because people underestimated how much damage a blade could do. Ambush, Juno said tersely. Red serpents hit our shipment point. Boss is still there, handling it. He said to bring them here. Said you could, he gestured helplessly at the carnage. Could what? Perform miracles. She was one person with a basic medical kit, not a trauma bay with a full surgical team. But they were looking at her with desperate hope, these killers who'd probably never hoped for anything in their lives, and her hands were already moving because that's what they did. Save first. Question later. Always. The next 2 hours blurred into the familiar rhythm of emergency medicine, pressure on wounds, improvised IVs, her voice steady as she gave orders these dangerous men actually followed. She saved the knife wound, pulled him back from the edge through sheer determination and hands that knew exactly where to press, when to cut, how to stop bleeding, that wanted to take everything. She saved the worst gunshot wound, the one that had nicked the femoral artery, her fingers slick with blood as she clamped and stitched with supplies meant for minor injuries, not battlefield surgery. The man, she learned his name was Tae-min, the Black Tiger's strategist, the one with kind eyes that seemed wrong in a killer's face, gripped her wrist when she finished. Thank you, he rasped. Boss said you were special. Now I understand. But she couldn't save the 5th man. He'd taken a bullet to the chest, and by the time they'd gotten him to her, his lungs were already filling with blood, his body already shutting down. She held him anyway, her hands trying to stem bleeding that wouldn't stop, her voice murmuring reassurances that felt like lies. It's okay, she whispered in Korean. You're okay. Just stay with me. But he didn't stay. His eyes went distant, then empty, and she felt the exact moment his heart stopped beating beneath her palms. 23 years old, she'd learn later. A kid, really. Someone's son. Someone who'd made choices that led him to die on a safe house floor while a nurse who'd sworn to do no harm knelt in his blood. The Black Tiger arrived an hour later, his suit torn and bloodstained, his face a mask of cold fury that cracked when he saw her. Ji-eun sat against the wall, still covered in the dead man's blood, staring at her shaking hands like they belonged to someone else. Ji-eun, he dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands hovering like he didn't know if he was allowed to touch her anymore. Who was he? Her voice sounded distant, clinical. The one who died. Who was he? His name was Minho. He'd been with me for 3 years. He was, the Black Tiger's jaw tightened. He was loyal. That's all that matters. No. She finally looked up at him, and something in her expression made him flinch. That's not all that matters. He was a person. He had a family, friends, a life that ended tonight because of, she gestured vaguely at the carnage around them. Because of this. Your world. Your war. He knew the risks. Did he? Did he really understand that one day he'd bleed out on a marble floor while someone who barely knows his name tries to keep his heart beating? Her hands were shaking worse now, the adrenaline crash hitting hard. I saved 4 of your men tonight. 4 killers. 4 people who do terrible things in your name. And I did it because that's what I do, I save lives. But Min-ho. Her voice cracked. I couldn't save him. And you know what the worst part is? He waited, his expression carved from stone. I checked his phone while I was trying to keep him alive. His last text was to his mother, telling her he'd visit this weekend. He had a mother. And now I have to live with the knowledge that she's going to get a phone call, or maybe just silence, and she'll never know exactly how her son died. But I know. I'll always know. I'm sorry. The words sounded foreign in his mouth, unpracticed. I never wanted you to see this. But this is what you are. She stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air. This is your life. Men dying. Men killing. An endless cycle of violence that you orchestrate from the shadows. How am I supposed to? She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the tears that wanted to come. How can I save lives during the day and love someone who takes them at night? The silence stretched between them like an open wound. Then he said, very quietly, I am what I am. I won't apologize for surviving. I won't apologize for building something that can't be torn down. I won't apologize for the choices I made when I was 15 years old and the alternative was dying in an alley like garbage. I'm not asking you to apologize. Yes, you are. He stood, and she saw something dangerous flickering in his eyes. You want me to feel guilty. You want me to regret the blood on my hands. But I don't. Every person I've killed, every order I've given, every act of violence, they kept me alive. They kept people like Taemin alive. They built something larger than myself. I'm not a good man, Ji-eun. I've never pretended to be. You're the one who decided I was worth saving. Maybe I was wrong. The words landed like bullets. He took a step back, his expression closing off completely, becoming the mask he showed the world, cold, untouchable, lethal. Maybe you were. Maybe this was a mistake from the beginning. A nurse and a killer. What did we think would happen? Ji-eun's chest felt like it was caving in. This was the out. This was the moment where she could walk away, return to her safe existence, pretend these weeks had been temporary insanity. She opened her mouth to say yes, to agree, to end this before it destroyed them both. But what came out was, tell me how it happened. What? Tell me how you became this. Not the legend. Not the black tiger. You. The boy before the monster. Because if I'm going to stay, her voice wavered. If I'm going to choose this, choose you, I need to understand. Leave. His voice was hollow, defeated. I'll make sure you're protected. I'll make sure the red serpents never touch you. But leave before this destroys everything good left in you. No. Ji-eun. No. She crossed to him, grabbed his blood-stained jacket, forced him to look at her. I don't want to leave. I want to understand. I want to see the boy who became the black tiger. I want to know if there's anything left to love beneath the legend. He stared at her for a long moment, something breaking behind his eyes. Then he started talking, his voice low and rough, telling her about Busan's worst neighborhoods where survival was a daily negotiation with death. About a mother who loved him but couldn't stop using, who died when he was 12 and left him alone in a world that devoured children. About sleeping in doorways and stealing food and learning that kindness was a luxury he couldn't afford. I was 15 when Park's gang tried to recruit me, he said, his gaze distant, seeing things she couldn't. I refused. So they decided to make an example. 5 of them cornered me in an alley. They were going to beat me, rape me, leave me broken as a warning to other kids who thought they could say no. Ji-eun's hand found his, held tight. I killed 3 of them that night. Used a broken bottle I'd hidden in my jacket. The other 2 ran. And when Park himself came for revenge, I killed him too. Took over his territory. Built something that couldn't be destroyed by fear or violence or anyone's cruelty but my own. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were raw with something that might have been shame or might have been defiance. I'm not sorry I survived, Ji-eun. I'm only sorry that surviving required becoming this. She pulled him down to her, kissed him with salt on her lips, his tears or hers, she couldn't tell. When they broke apart, she said quietly, teach me your world. Help me understand it. But don't ask me to become part of it. Don't ask me to stop being who I am. I would never. And I won't ask you to stop being who you are either. You're a killer. I'm a healer. Maybe that's the point. Maybe I'm here to remind you that mercy is possible. And maybe you're here to remind me that survival sometimes requires brutality. She rested her forehead against his. But I'm staying. On my terms. With my eyes open. Even knowing it might destroy us both. He held her like she was the only solid thing in a world made of smoke and mirrors, and whispered, then God help us both. The safe house became her second home, though calling it a home felt wrong when the walls held secrets and the air tasted like controlled violence. Ji-eun learned to navigate the Black Tiger's world the way she'd learned anatomy, by careful observation, by asking questions, by understanding that every system had its logic even when that logic was written in blood. Taemin recovered slowly, his gratitude manifesting in patient explanations of the organization's structure. He was the strategist, the one who planned operations with the precision of a chess master, his kind eyes hiding a mind that calculated odds and acceptable losses with disturbing ease. He taught her the hand signals, the codes, the way to read a room for threats. You saved my life, he said one afternoon while she changed his bandages. That means something in our world. It means I owe you a debt that can't be repaid. You don't owe me anything. I'm a nurse. It's what I do. No. He caught her wrist gently. You're more than that now. You're the boss's weakness and his strength. That makes you important. That makes you a target. She'd met the enforcer next, a woman named Ji-woo whose compact frame hid the kind of violence that made grown men flinch. Ji-woo had looked Ji-eun up and down with undisguised skepticism, then said bluntly, you're soft. You'll get yourself killed, which means you'll get him killed trying to save you. Then teach me not to be soft, Ji-eun had replied. That earned her something that might have been respect. Ji-woo started showing up at the safe house in the early mornings, before Ji-eun's hospital shifts, drilling her in basic self-defense. Not enough to make her dangerous, Ji-eun would never be that, but enough to buy herself time, to escape, to survive. You don't fight to win, Ji-woo explained, demonstrating a move that would shatter a kneecap. You fight to run. You fight to create distance. You fight dirty and fast and you don't stop until you're safe. The Black Tiger watched these sessions from the windows, his expression unreadable. Later, when they were alone, he'd pull Ji-eun against him and say, I hate that you need to learn this. I hate that your world requires it, she'd reply. But I'm not leaving. So I'm adapting. Juno remained a constant shadow, driving her to and from the hospital, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. He spoke little, but Ji-eun learned to read his silences, the tension in his shoulders that meant danger nearby, the slight relaxation that meant they were safe, at least for now. You love him, Juno said one night, the first personal thing he'd ever said to her. Yes. He loves you too. I've known him for 8 years. I've never seen him love anything. Juno's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. That terrifies me more than any rival gang. The Red Serpents made their move 3 weeks after Minho's death. Intelligence came through Taemin's network, whispers, observations, the subtle shifts that preceded violence like barometric pressure before a storm. Their leader was a woman known only as the Serpent Queen, a legend in her own right, someone who'd built an empire that rivaled the Black Tigers through calculated cruelty and strategic brilliance. She wants a war, Taemin explained during a late-night strategy session Ji-eun had been allowed to witness. She's been consolidating power, absorbing smaller operations, positioning herself to strike. And now, he pulled up a photograph on his tablet. Ji-eun's face, captured leaving the hospital. Now she knows about you. The Black Tiger's expression went arctic. Security details doubled. Routes randomized. She doesn't breathe the same air as Ji-eun. She doesn't need to. Taemin's voice carried grim certainty. She just needs to make it known she can reach Ji-eun anytime she wants. That's the threat. That's the message, the Black Tiger has something to lose now. The photograph arrived 2 days later, slipped under the safehouse door with artistic precision. Ji-eun, walking through the hospital parking lot, crosshairs drawn over her heart in red ink. No words needed. She found the Black Tiger standing at the windows, the photograph crumpled in his fist, his entire body vibrating with barely contained rage. I'm sending you away, he said without turning. Out of Seoul. Out of Korea if necessary. Somewhere she can't find you. No. This isn't a negotiation, Ji-eun. You're right. It's not. She moved to stand beside him, her reflection ghostly in the window glass. Because I'm not leaving. Running makes me a liability that needs protecting forever. Staying makes me someone who refuses to be leverage. Staying makes you a corpse. Then teach me to survive. She turned to face him fully. Your world, your rules. I'll learn them. I'll follow them. But I won't disappear like I'm something shameful you need to hide. The ambush came during a meeting at one of his legitimate business fronts, a restaurant in Gangnam where the Black Tiger conducted the kind of transactions that looked legal on paper but funded his empire. Ji-eun had come against his wishes, insisting she wouldn't be kept in a cage no matter how gilded. The red serpents hit fast and brutal. Windows shattered. Gunfire erupted. Ji-woo threw Ji-eun under a table while returning fire with cold precision. Through the chaos, Ji-eun saw him, the Black Tiger, moving with lethal grace until a bullet caught his shoulder, spinning him sideways. She didn't think. Didn't calculate odds or consider her safety. She just moved, her nurse training overriding everything else. She reached him as he staggered, her hands already assessing the wound, applying pressure while bullets whined overhead. You need to get down, he gasped. You need to shut up and let me work. Her hands were steady despite the terror, despite the violence, despite everything. The bullet had gone through, clean entry and exit, missing the subclavian artery by centimeters. Lucky. They were so goddamn lucky. She tore strips from his shirt, improvising a pressure bandage while Ji-woo and Juno eliminated the remaining threats with efficient brutality. The Black Tiger watched her work with something like awe, this woman who'd run toward him through gunfire instead of away, who was saving his life in the middle of a war zone like it was just another day in the ER. You're insane, he said. I'm a trauma nurse. We don't run from emergencies. She tied off the bandage, checked his pulse, assessed for shock. Besides, you do the same for me. I'd burn the entire city down for you. The serpents who survived the ambush limped away with a new understanding. The Black Tiger's nurse wasn't a weakness to exploit. She was a force that ran toward danger with the same fearless dedication he brought to violence. Word spread through the underworld like wildfire. The Black Tiger's woman had saved him while his enemies closed in. The Black Tiger's woman didn't flinch. Taemin said it best, later, while Ji-eun properly treated the gunshot wound in the safe house, you're one of us now. Not because you kill. But because you're willing to die for him. That's the only currency we understand. That night, After the adrenaline faded and the reality settled in, the black tiger found her on the balcony, staring at Soul's lights like they held answers. He wrapped his good arm around her waist, pulled her back against his chest, and said quietly, "I love you." 3 words. Simple. Devastating. Ji-eun turned in his embrace, cupped his face between her hands, and said, "I love you too. And that terrifies me more than anything that happened today." Good. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her mouth. Terror means we understand the stakes. They made love that night with the desperation of people who knew their time might be measured in days instead of years. Soft and fierce by turns, his hands worshipping every inch of her skin while she traced his scars like reading Braille, learning his history through the violence written on his body. When they finally lay tangled together, exhausted and vulnerable, she said, "Promise me something. Anything. Promise that when the storm comes, and it's coming, we both know it, you won't try to protect me by pushing me away. We face it together or not at all." He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on her spine. Then, "I can't promise I won't try to save you. I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to trust that I can stand beside you." She lifted her head, met his eyes in the darkness. "I'm not a soldier. I'm not a killer. But I'm not fragile either. I run toward disasters for a living. Let me run toward this one with you." Together, he finally said, the words sounding like a vow. "We face it together." Outside, Seoul glittered with ignorant beauty, millions of lives continuing in blissful unawareness of the war brewing in their midst. Inside, a killer and a healer held each other in the calm before the storm, stealing moments of peace while they still could. The Serpent Queen was coming. They both knew it. But for now, in this stolen moment, they had each other. And they had love. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like enough. They took her in broad daylight, which was the brilliance of it. Ji-eun was crossing the hospital parking lot during shift change, surrounded by dozens of staff, when the van pulled up. 2 men in hospital security uniforms, moving with practiced efficiency, one of them pressing something against her neck that made her vision blur and her legs buckle. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Juno sprinting toward her from 50 yards away, his hand reaching for his weapon, already too late. She woke in concrete and shadows, her head pounding, her wrists zip-tied to a metal chair. The room was industrial, abandoned warehouse or factory, the kind of place Seoul had thousands of, invisible and perfect for things that needed to stay hidden. Her nursing training kicked in automatically, cataloging injuries, contusion at the injection site, possible mild concussion, dehydration, but otherwise intact. They'd wanted her alive and functional. That was either very good or very bad. The woman who entered 20 minutes later made Ji-eun's blood freeze. She was beautiful in the way venomous creatures were beautiful, sleek black suit, silver jewelry that glinted like scales, movements that spoke of coiled violence always ready to strike. The Serpent Queen. She had to be. "Nurse Ji-eun," the woman said in perfect, unaccented Korean. "I apologize for the dramatic introduction. But the black tiger needed to understand something, and men like him only understand one language." She pulled up a chair, sat with casual elegance. "Loss. If you hurt me, he'll destroy you." Ji-eun kept her voice steady, channeling every ounce of composure she'd cultivated over years of facing crisis. "Oh, I'm counting on him trying." The Serpent Queen's smile was sharp enough to cut. "He'll give up territory, resources, power, anything to get you back alive. And when he's weak, when he's desperate, when he's made all the concessions I require, then I'll kill you anyway. And him. And everyone he's ever cared about." She left Ji-eun alone with guards who looked bored by captivity, who saw her as just another piece in a game too large for her to comprehend. They didn't know she'd spent 6 years in emergency medicine, where survival often depended on improvisation and steady hands under impossible pressure. The zip ties were standard plastic, which meant they had a weakness at the locking mechanism. Ji-eun worked her wrists slowly, using the metal chair to create friction, ignoring the burn as plastic cut into skin. When one of the guards stepped outside for a cigarette, she made her move. The chair broke against the concrete floor with a crash that brought the remaining guard running. Ji-eun swung the metal leg she'd wrenched free, catching him across the temple with desperate force. He went down hard, and she was already running, her wrists still bound but her legs free, her heart hammering as she searched for an exit in the maze of corridors. She almost made it. Almost reached the loading dock door before 3 more guards materialized, blocking her path. But she bought time, proven she wasn't helpless, and sometimes that was all survival required. The Black Tiger received the proof-of-life video 6 hours after Ji-eun's disappearance. The Serpent Queen's demands were clear: territory in Gangnam, shipping routes through Incheon, and his legitimate businesses signed over to her operation. He had 24 hours to comply. Taemin found him in the strategy room, surrounded by maps and photographs, his expression carved from ice and fury. "Boss, if we give her what she wants. We're not giving her anything." The Black Tiger's voice was soft, which made it more terrifying. "She made a mistake. She took someone I love and thought that made me weak. She's about to learn what I become when I have nothing left to lose." He called in every favor, every alliance, every piece of leverage he'd accumulated over 15 years. The assault on the Serpent stronghold was surgical in its brutality, 3 teams hitting simultaneously, cutting through her defenses like a scalpel through flesh. The Black Tiger led the main force himself, moving through her guards with lethal precision, leaving bodies in his wake. He reached the detention area to find Ji-eun already free, standing over an unconscious guard with a metal pipe in her bound hands, blood streaming from a cut above her eye but her expression fierce and unbroken. "I told you I wouldn't be helpless," she said, swaying slightly on her feet. He crossed to her in 3 strides, cutting her bonds with a knife that had seen use recently, pulling her against him with his clean hand while the other still held his weapon. "You're insane. I learned from the best." She pulled back, assessed him quickly, new blood on his suit, favoring his left side, breathing slightly elevated. "You're hurt. Later." He handed her off to Juno, who'd appeared at his shoulder. "Get her out of here." "No." Ji-eun grabbed his jacket. "We finish this together. You promised." The Serpent Queen was waiting in her command center, surrounded by her remaining guards, her expression tight with fury as her empire crumbled around her. She looked up as the Black Tiger entered, Ji-eun at his side, and something like respect flickered across her face. "So the nurse has teeth after all," she said. "I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again. There won't be a next time." The Black Tiger's voice carried absolute certainty. "You wanted to take what I valued most. You wanted to prove I was weak. But she's not my weakness." He glanced at Ji-eun, something raw and honest in his expression. "She's my strength. And that's something you'll never understand." The confrontation that followed was brief and brutal. The Serpent Queen fought with the desperation of someone whose empire was collapsing, but desperation couldn't match the Black Tiger's cold fury backed by Ji-eun's refusal to be a victim. When it ended, when the Serpent Queen lay defeated, her organization scattered, the cost was written in blood on both sides. Taemin had taken a bullet to the leg. Ji-woo had knife wounds across her ribs. 3 of the Black Tiger's people wouldn't be going home at all. The victory tasted like ash and copper, bought at a price that made Ji-eun's chest ache with the weight of it. The Black Tiger himself had been slashed across the side during the final confrontation, his suit soaked with blood he hadn't acknowledged until the adrenaline faded. Ji-eun found him in the back of the tactical van, staring at nothing, and dropped to her knees in front of him with her medical kit. "Let me see," she said quietly. He let her peel away layers of expensive fabric ruined by violence, let her clean and assess and stitch with hands that shook now that the danger had passed. The wound was deep but not critical. He'd been lucky, they'd both been lucky, though luck felt like the wrong word for what they'd survived. "What are we doing?" she whispered as she tied off the final suture. "What have we become?" His hand cupped her face, tilting it up to meet his eyes. Blood still stained his skin, his, hers, others, impossible to separate now. We're surviving. Together. Exactly like we promised. People died tonight because of us. People die every night in this city. At least these deaths meant something. At least we were fighting for each other. He pulled her up onto his lap, mindful of his injury, and pressed his forehead against hers. I know you wish I was a better man. I know you wish this world was different. But I can't change what I am, Ji-eun. I can only promise that everything I am, everything I do, is to keep you safe. She kissed him then, tasting blood and salt and exhaustion, pouring everything she couldn't say into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, she said, I don't wish you were different. I just wish the cost wasn't so high. The cost of loving me will always be high. His voice carried brutal honesty. Are you willing to keep paying it? Ji-eun looked at him, this beautiful, terrible man who'd become her entire world despite every reason she had to run. She thought about Minho dying in her arms, about the violence she'd witnessed, about the blood that would never fully wash away. But she also thought about the way he looked at her like she was salvation, about the loyalty he inspired, about the fact that he'd been ready to give up everything he'd built just for the chance to save her. Yes, she said simply. For as long as you'll have me. Outside, Seoul continued its ignorant existence, and inside a blood-stained tactical van, a killer and a healer held each other while their worlds burned and rebuilt in equal measure. The city looked different after war. Seoul hadn't changed, same neon bleeding through rain, same chaos of humanity compressed into steel and concrete, but Ji-eun saw it with new eyes now. Eyes that had witnessed the machinery beneath the surface, the violence that kept the peace, the cost of every comfortable ignorance. She returned to work 3 days after the Serpent Queen fell. Min Seo took one look at the fading bruises on her wrists, the haunted quality behind her eyes, and pulled her into the supply closet. What happened to you? Min Seo demanded. And don't say, nothing, because you look like you went to war. I can't explain. Ji-eun's voice cracked around the edges. I wish I could, but I can't. Just, trust that I'm okay. Or I will be. Min Seo searched her face for a long moment, then pulled her into a fierce hug. Whatever you're into, whoever you're with, just promise me you know what you're doing. Ji-eun thought about that promise while she worked, while she saved a heart attack victim in Bay 3 and stabilized a construction accident in Bay 7. Did she know what she was doing? She'd fallen in love with a killer. She'd stood beside him while his world burned. She'd fought her way out of captivity and watched people die and stitched wounds that came from bullets instead of accidents. But she'd also never felt more alive. Never felt more seen. Never felt like her existence mattered beyond the patients on her gurney and the shifts on her schedule. The Black Tiger's empire consolidated in the aftermath. Rival factions recognized his strength, his willingness to burn everything down for what he loved. Territory expanded. Respect deepened. Power solidified in ways that should have satisfied 15 years of building. But Ji-eun found him on the safe house balcony more nights than not, staring at the city like it held answers instead of just more questions. Talk to me, she said one night, sliding under his arm, fitting against his side with the ease of practice. I'm thinking about costs. His voice was quiet, contemplative. About Minho and the others who died. About what I'm willing to sacrifice for power I'm not sure I want anymore. What do you want? He turned to look at her fully, his hand coming up to trace her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. This. You. The way you look at me like I'm still capable of being good. The way you challenge me and save me and refuse to let me become the monster everyone expects. You're not a monster. I'm not a good man either. He pulled her closer. But maybe I could be better. For you. Because of you. They talked through the night, building something impossible together. He would delegate the brutal enforcement to Ji Woo and others who understood violence as a native language. He would expand the legitimate businesses, create distance between himself and the darkest operations. He would never be clean, 15 years of blood didn't wash away, but he could be cleaner. I need you to understand, he said as dawn painted the sky in shades of amber, danger will always exist. My past will always cast shadows. People will always know what I am, what I've done. I can't give you normal. I don't want normal. Ji-eun laced her fingers through his. I want you. The real you, not sanitized, not apologetic, not pretending. But I also need to stay who I am. I need the ER. I need to save lives. That's my truth the same way violence is yours. Then we keep both. He kissed her forehead, her temple, finally her mouth. We build something that accommodates the healer and the killer. We figure out how to exist in both worlds simultaneously. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. 6 months later, Ji-eun pushed through the hospital doors after a 12-hour shift that felt almost manageable now. She'd learned to pace herself, to recognize when exhaustion became liability, to actually take the breaks Min Seo forced on her. The rain had stopped an hour ago, leaving Seoul washed clean and glittering. The black sedan waited in the pickup zone, and Ji-eun's heart did that stupid flutter it always did when she saw it. 6 months and the sight of that car still made her feel like a teenager with her first crush, still made her skin warm with anticipation. Juno was at the wheel, always Juno, always professional, always watching. But the back door opened before she reached it, and there he was. The Black Tiger. Her Black Tiger, though she'd learned his real name months ago, whispered it against his skin in private moments when the world fell away. She slid in beside him without hesitation, tucking herself against his side with the comfortable familiarity of practice. His arm came around her immediately, pulling her close, and she breathed in sandalwood and safety and home. How was your day, Nurse Ji-eun? His voice carried warmth it never held for anyone else, a softness he reserved exclusively for her. Long. But it's better now. She tilted her face up for the kiss he was already offering, brief and sweet and perfect. You. Tedious meetings about shipping manifests and tax implications. The glamorous life of legitimate business. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. Though Taemin says our legal holdings are up 18% this quarter. See. I told you crime doesn't pay as well as actual business. He laughed, the sound still surprising her with its genuineness after months of coaxing it out. Crime pays excellently. It just comes with occupational hazards I'm less willing to accept these days. They drove through Seoul's arteries, the city streaming past in familiar patterns. Ji-eun had learned these routes, learned the safe houses and meeting points, learned the geography of his world the way she'd learned anatomy, through careful study and practical application. But tonight they were going to the apartment they'd chosen together, the place that existed between both their worlds. Min Seo asked me to her wedding, Ji-eun said. She wants me to bring a +1. She's very curious about my mysterious boyfriend. I'm not sure boyfriend accurately describes what I am. What would you prefer? The terrifying crime lord I'm hopelessly in love with? That might raise questions at a wedding. His chest rumbled with quiet laughter. Just boyfriend is fine. Though I reserve the right to be terrifying if anyone asks you to dance. Possessive. Absolutely. He pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Ji-eun. I don't share. She thought about the night 6 months ago when everything had exploded, when they'd both been covered in blood and consequences, when she'd looked at him and seen all the darkness he contained. She thought about the choice she'd made then, to stay, to love him anyway, to build something impossible together. Nothing had been easy. There were still nightmares, still moments when the weight of what they were became almost unbearable. She still saw patients die and came home to a man whose hands had caused deaths. The contradiction lived in her chest like a constant ache. But there were also mornings waking up beside him, his face peaceful in sleep, vulnerable in ways he never was awake. There were nights like this, driving through the city they both loved in different ways. There were quiet conversations over coffee about shipping routes and surgical techniques, two completely different languages finding common ground in each other. The car pulled up to their building, high-rise, secure, anonymous among thousands of others. Juno opened the door with his usual professionalism, and Jiun stepped out into the night air that smelled like rain and possibility. The black tiger followed, his hand finding the small of her back as they walked toward the entrance. They looked like any other couple coming home after work, tired, comfortable, ordinary. Nobody watching would guess their story, the fire they'd walked through to get here. Inside their apartment, Jiun kicked off her shoes and he loosened his tie, and they moved around each other with practiced ease. She reheated leftovers while he sorted through legitimate business correspondence. They ate on the couch, her feet in his lap, discussing their days like normal people lived normal lives. Later, in bed, she curled against his chest and listened to his heartbeat, steady, reliable, alive. His fingers traced patterns on her spine, and she felt him relax in ways he never did anywhere else. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Getting in my car that night?" Jiun thought about the question. About everything that had followed, the terror, the violence, the impossible love that had grown in the space between their worlds. About the woman she'd been 6 months ago, exhausted and empty in going through the motions of existence. "No," she said finally, and meant it completely. "I regret that people got hurt. I regret the cost. But I don't regret you. I don't regret us." He kissed the top of her head, held her tighter. Outside, Seoul glittered with millions of stories, millions of lives intersecting and separating in patterns as complex as cardiac rhythms. But in this moment, in this bed, in this impossible space they'd carved out together, there was only them. The healer and the killer. The light and the shadow. The nurse who saved lives and the man who'd taken them. Choosing each other anyway. Eyes wide open. Hearts despite everything. This time, she knew exactly whose car she was getting into. And she wouldn't have it any other way. If you made it to the end, you're exactly the kind of viewer we create these stories for, someone who appreciates moral complexity and characters who feel real. Don't let this be the last one you watch. Hit subscribe and join a community that loves stories where the answers aren't easy and the choices matter. See you in the next one.